Good morning from St. Barts in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar here, and it is my delight to welcome you to the forum, where each week we explore important issues at the intersection of faith and the modern world. On this Labor Day weekend, we're honored to have with us the Reverend Richard Witt. He is the Executive Director of Rural and Migrant Ministry and a priest here in the Episcopal Diocese of New York, and he will talk about the organization he directs as well as important issues for workers today. I should mention as we begin that this session of the forum is pre-recorded, so we won't be able to take your questions live today. Richard, thank you so much for being with us. I understand you're joining us from a camp that Rural and Migrant Ministry offers upstate.
Yes, thank you. Good morning to everybody. What a joy to be with you. And Peter, thank you for putting this together and inviting me to be present. I'm presently at our overnight camp, our 1 week overnight camp. It's our 32nd year of offering this overnight camp for children from farm working and rural families from across New York State. And we made it through the hurricane of the first few days, and now we're doing sunshine.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time away from camp to be with us for a few minutes this morning. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about Rural and Migrant Ministry, your role in the organization, and its connection to the Episcopal Church in the Diocese of New York.
Thanks, Sue. So Rural and Migrant Ministry was created in 1981 by the Episcopal Diocese of New York, along with 4 other Protestant denominations, to serve rural people, primarily farm workers, who were in need, or to capture what they said in their founding papers, where there were gaps in services. So RMM was not created to be another congregation, although we have many congregational aspects to us, nor was RMM created to be a social service organization, because they felt that there were a lot of other social service deliveries. I, in the late 1980s, was serving as a chaplain at Vassar College, and also associate rector at Christ Church Poughkeepsie, and I made the mistake of doing a fundraising event for RMM, and next thing I knew, in 1991, they invited me to be their executive director. So I've been executive director for 30 years now.
How has the organization developed over the course of the past 30 years?
Well, when we were first created, the executive director looked about and realized that the children of farm workers, the very young children, had nowhere to go except to be out in the fields or the orchards with their parents. And so RMM set about to create a child care Head Start program in Ulster County near New Paltz for those children, so that they could get a start and that they would be in a safer environment. From there, we looked at housing conditions for farm workers and worked to build safe and affordable housing for farm workers who at that point were primarily migratory, coming up from the East Coast and coming across from Texas and Mexico. The workers would arrive here to pick apples, to pick onions. New York is a major agricultural state, by the way, and in the top 3 in many things, including we're number 2 in apples. So the workers would be here for a season, and it was about how to make things work for them. Along that way, we realized that the older children really had nothing to do during the summer. A lot of them were in summer school, because as a migrant child, you could be in 4 different schools in 1 year. And so we started sending some of the children to different church camps or YMCA camps, and the kids would come back and they'd say, I had a great time, but I was the only rural kid there, or I was the only kid of color. Can't we have our own camp? And so in the late 1980s, we decided to create our own overnight camp and have been doing that ever since. But that in turn gives us a chance to be in relationship with the families. So that was the creation of our whole youth leadership program. RMM really has three main programs: youth leadership development, education, which is really about leadership development of adults, and accompaniment. And accompaniment means accompanying workers as they seek to improve working and living conditions. And I know we'll talk more about that in a few moments. So during that period, my predecessor, the Reverend Gail Keeney Mulligan, was really about helping people create their own organization. So after we did the housing, she helped people address the issues in their communities. So for example, she helped a group of rural women create their own women's leadership program. She helped a group of farm workers create a food cooperative. She helped a group of rural teenagers that had discovered that a local shopping plaza had a quota of hiring one person of color per store, and they wanted to do something about that. So Gail was about helping people address their concerns and their needs themselves, and then getting the congregations of the diocese to be allies with those people.
Now, the third word in the title of your organization is ministry. You talked about the Episcopal Diocese being involved in the start of RMM as well as other Protestant denominations. Can you talk about your work as ministry and what the gospel tells us to do in terms of the workers and our obligation to the workers of our society?
We're sort of simple people at RMM. The gospel that we really root ourselves in are the two great commandments: to love the Lord your God with all of your heart and soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And RMM is about living into the gospel and bearing witness or being beacons of God's hope among those who so regularly are unseen. That somebody once said to me that New York's farm workers exist to feed New York City. And so we're in relationship with these brothers and sisters who are farm workers, but we never see them. We never really hear about their needs and hopes, nor do we often have an opportunity to learn from them. Rural Migrant Ministry sees the gospel as an opportunity to witness God's love through each other, as a partnership, if you will. And I remember when I first arrived at Rural Migrant Ministry, I ran into a church woman who said to me, I spent the summer working with farm workers. I was there to save some souls. And I said, oh, how'd that go? And she said, well, one soul got saved. And I said, whose? And she said, mine. And I said, oh, what happened? She said, well, I went into a farm camp to teach the Bible, and I realized that 6 of the workers were deacons in their own church back home and knew a heck of a lot more about Scripture than I did. So I spent the summer learning from them. I think that story captures in part the essence from RMM of seeing that we are all God's children, and what can we do to remove the barriers that keep us from witnessing God's love through one another. So RMM spends a lot of time working with people to help remove those barriers and to be beacons of God love. We don't spend as much time talking about what we do or preaching the gospel as much as we do trying to live into the gospel.
You told this story about a woman who learned something. I wonder what you've learned over the course of the past 3 decades with this organization.
Uh, what a great question. I've I've learned how to be in relationship with others, especially those who are different. I've learned that people have amazing stories and amazing gifts, and if I get to know them, I will be touched by those stories and those gifts. I've learned how to not just have assumptions about people's conditions or um, judging people because I've seen time and time again how much they have to offer me. I come from a background of tremendous privilege and tremendous gifts, and I've learned that, boy, there's a heck of a lot more for me to learn. And there's an opportunity for me to use my gifts and my privilege um, to be in partnership with others. And that's been a tremendous growth in humility um, and also determination to uh, use those gifts to bring about change. And when all is said and done, there's such a joy. I mean, there's such an enriching aspect to life of connecting with others and seeing a wall of oppression, a wall of ignorance, a wall of prejudice come down like Jericho, and see God's love shine through. Especially as I get to work with the young people and the children. A lot of our congregations talk about, where are the youth, or how do we connect with children? RMM, we have more children than we can deal with, and boy, I'm constantly learning uh, how to be in relationship, including the camper uh, yesterday who pointed out some of my wrinkles and said, "What what are those?" And and that opened the door for a conversation about aging, which is something that I didn't really want to talk about, but it's a reality.
What can the rest of us learn from the people who are growing our food? You talked about the distance those of us in the city have from the people who make it possible for us to eat. You're interacting with this population on a daily basis. Um, what should we know about them that we don't already know?
Mm. So here's the funny thing about our lives. The Many folks want to help the farm workers, the rural food processing workers, what have you. And the assumption is that helping them is about, giving them things or coming up and being with them. And RMM certainly has some opportunities for people to come and be in relationship. But the reality is that what really is most helpful to the people we work with is those of us who live in the cities and those of us that have access to power. We're the ones that can really have the greatest impact upon the lives of farm workers because of two things. One, we're the consumers. We're the ones that say, oh, I don't want that bruised apple, or oh, I want to get my food as cheap as possible. We're the ones who can say to the farmers in the farmers market in Union Square, how are you treating your workers? Why is my food so cheap? If I paid more for my food, could you afford to give more to your workers? Could you afford more for yourself? Because farm workers are tremendously poor. Farm workers are tremendously disenfranchised, and many farmers are also, not to the same degree as the farm workers, but many farmers are struggling also. So the more we as consumers can engage in conversations about the cost of our food and where our food comes from and how it's produced, the more we can help create a food system that is just for all. So that's one major realm. The second major realm is we're the ones that are involved in electing our assembly members and our senators, governor, what have you. We're the ones that control the policies and the laws that are impacting the lives of farm workers. And when we're electing these officials, when we're voting for them, when we're going to candidate nights and questioning them, are we asking them about our food system? Are we asking them about farm workers? Are we holding them accountable to all? You know, as I mentioned earlier, many of us are not in relationship or even aware of farm workers. We do have a good sense of farmers because, you know, we've seen movies like Field of Dreams or Lassie. You know, we have a sense of farmers, but we don't really have a sense of farm workers. And the farm workers' voices aren't heard because they don't have the vehicles to be heard that the farmers and the ag business system has. So, as church folk, as people of faith who believe in justice, who believe in inclusion, how can we use our voices to magnify the voices of the farm workers? You know, Rural Migrant Ministry spent 20 some years working on legislation in Albany. And people say, well, you know, that sounds rather political. How could you be involved in that? We got involved in it because a group of farm workers went up to Albany because they were asked to go to Albany to testify on their working conditions in the onion farms of Orange County. So really an hour away from New York City. And there, while in Albany, they were told by an aide to a very powerful state senator, the senator doesn't really care about you because you don't have any political voice. At that point, they also discovered that they were excluded from many of the basic rights afforded the rest of us. The right to a day of rest, the right to bargain collectively, the right to disability insurance. All these rights were given to the rest of us in the 1930s as a part of the New Deal. But at that point, farm workers were specifically excluded because of Southern legislators who said they would not have workers of color treated the same as white workers. And so Franklin Roosevelt, a good Episcopalian, and his Secretary of Labor, Francis Perkins, another good Episcopalian, reached a deal saying, all right, we'll exclude the farm workers, but we'll come back and include them later. They never came back and included them. And so farm workers were treated differently. So we had these farm workers say to the Rural Migrant Ministry, would you stand with us? Would you help our voice be heard? Would you help us be treated equally? And we couldn't say no. And so we got involved in this legislative advocacy campaign. And for 20 some years, we went to Albany, we visited legislators, our people in our congregations got involved. We marched from New York City to Albany, we marched from Long Island to Albany. And finally, in 2019, the law was finally passed that gave farm workers equal rights. It wouldn't have happened without the church being prophetic and bearing witness. And now it's up to the church to ensure that farm workers really are treated equally. So that was a mouthful to your question. I'll stop there.
Very, very helpful. I'm wondering if you can speak to the issues that church members and other kind of average voters can and should pay attention to now in this moment.
I want to I want to hold that up, and actually, go in a different direction than your word, with all due respect to should, um, because we see this as an opportunity. We see this as an opportunity to be in relationship with those that we're not in relationship with, and in turn, as I've mentioned before, to learn from those who have had different experiences in life, from those who come from different countries, different cultures, from those who know what it means to struggle. We've all just spent the past year in lockdown. It's been a struggle. Um, we've all reached out to try to learn from one another about how do you handle living in the midst of fear. The people we work with at RMM know what it means to live in the midst of fear. They're constantly facing fear. They're facing fear about survival, job wise. They're facing fear about the country's immigration policies. They're facing fear around racism and prejudice. Our people know how to live in fear. They don't like living in fear, but they know how to do it. I would position that our folks have something to teach the rest of us about how to live in the midst of fear, as one example. Our people really are into their families. And we see this time and time again because of working with the children. This week, our camp, for the first time, is meeting at the Fresh Air Fund camp, just outside of Fishkill. And I've met with a number of Fresh Air Fund camp staff who keep commenting on how remarkable the children are that are at our camp, how respectful they are, how loving they are, how calm they are. And that's a reflection of their families. Their families really know how to engage in love. Their families are very faithful families. My grandmother once said to me, if you want to be holy, hang around with holy people. Well, the people RMM works with are holy people, and there are opportunities, I think, for our congregations in the city, for St. Bart's, especially, to be in relationship with those folks because it provides an opportunity to get a glimpse of the holy.
And what are ways in which that can happen, in which this relationship can be fostered?
Well, one of the things that RMM does is we host what we call a delegation. We invite a delegation of folk from a congregation to come up and spend a day with us. We have a new home in Cornwall on Hudson, so it's not that far from the city. And folks come up and spend a day. We do some Bible study together. We go and meet with some of the youth and some of the workers. We go and visit a couple of the farm camps and the farming areas. And then we brainstorm about, how can we make a difference? How can we help build God's community? So there's a standing invitation to St. Bart's to come up and be with us. Our youth love coming to the city because they never get to go to the city very often. We have some remarkable youth groups. RMM actually has 5 youth groups. One of our youth groups is called the Youth Economic Group. They're up in the Catskills. They've created their own cooperative. They print shirts and bags with messages of social transformation. And they have traveled around the country. As far as we know, they're the only rural youth cooperative in the United States. They're also, this being Labor Day, they're affiliated with the New York State United Teachers Union. So their products are union made. And as far as we know, they're the only youth union affiliate in the United States. And they develop leadership skills, they develop business skills, and they end up being able to earn money from their cooperative. They would love to come down to St. Bart's and set up their shop and tell you their story. One of the cool things about them in their 10-year existence, 96% of them that have graduated from that program have gone on to college. Um, they are creative, they are fun, and I know that they would love to come down and visit, or have you come up to the Catskills and visit their shop, their center. Um, so we're offering a couple of opportunities to get out of the city. Um, the third opportunity is RMM is celebrating its 40th anniversary on October 9th and 10th up in Cornwall. And we have as our featured speaker the presiding bishop, Michael Curry. So it's a chance to come up for a day in the middle of leaf peeping season. And we have a concert, we have a bonfire, we have some workshops, and we have some phenomenal food, and we have the presiding bishop. So a chance to come up and meet our people because our youth and our workers will all be there. So it'll be a really wonderful way to just start connecting and building people, relationships.
Well, we'll put a link to the October 9th through 10th event in the chat so you all can click on that and find out more. Richard, the youth are most certainly invited to St. Bart's. And those of you who are watching, if you're interested in being a part of a delegation, send me an email, pthompson@stbarts.org, pthompson@stbarts.org, and we'll put a group together. So thank you for providing us with those options, Richard.
Always happy to. And we're always happy to come down and speak or preach or whatever to tell folks more.
I wonder, since this is Labor Day weekend and you talked about the unions and the youth being affiliated, I wonder if you can share your reflections on labor and how you think about Labor Day each year.
I had a friend years ago who said, you know, we are all workers. And I didn't quite understand that at first. And as time has gone on, I've come to appreciate that. I think all of us have come to appreciate that in the midst of the pandemic about, you know, what does it mean to be a worker? You know, do workers go somewhere else and work? Can you be a worker and work from your home? What are your hours? What are your pay? You know, there's a part of me that says, well, hey, if all these companies are now letting their workers work from home and we as workers are saying, well, that's great because I don't have to commute and I get to work at home, that's great. But then I'm thinking, wow, the companies are also saving money on having to air condition you or heat you because now you're having to pay for that. So I said that to my one son who was working from home, and I said, did you talk to your company about maybe reimbursing you for your heat and your air conditioning? And he looked at me like I was crazy. But, you know, what does it mean to be a worker? I think Labor Day affords the opportunity to examine how we spend a good part of our lives in labor. And for many of us, we have choices about how we do that. And we have voice in how we do that. I mean, my son could go and talk to his company about that. And I don't think he'd have much fear about that because he works for a high-tech company. But there are many of our brothers and sisters who don't have voice and who are expected to go and work, who can't work from home. You know, this past year, again, we all still needed to eat. The farm workers had to go to work. They had to work in the dairy barns in close proximity to each other. By the way, New York is in the top 3 in dairy production in the United States. Dairy is roughly 56% of New York's agriculture, of which New York's agriculture is a $6 billion a year industry. New York is an agricultural state. And I think they're number 3 now. They were number 1. The number 3 producing agricultural income county in New York State is Suffolk County on the eastern end of Long Island, where we think of the Hamptons and Shelter Island, what have you. It's a major agricultural county. So agriculture is a major part of New York. It's a major business. And in order for that business to succeed, and in order for us all to be fed, those workers had to go and face being in close proximity with other workers in the midst of a pandemic. They had to live in bunkhouses with each other. They had to travel in buses to get from the bunkhouses, the farm camps, to the dairy farms and to the orchards, what have you. They had to risk the virus. And for many of them, they weren't eligible for stimulus funds. So they had very little economic resource. And so RMM, just to go on a tangent for a moment, RMM this past year had to pivot and spend a lot of time gathering resources to deliver to our vulnerable families. We gave away over 10,000 masks. We delivered food and toilet paper to the workers and their families. We gave them money in order for them to pay to live. It took a lot for those laborers to be able to labor. So this Labor Day, I think we want to give thought to our own labor, and we want to give thought to those who labor to feed us, to protect us, to those laborers who were in the hospitals, those frontline workers that were laborers, so many laborers. And this holiday sort of seems strange to call it a holiday, but this holiday, to also give thanks, and this is going to sound strange also to some perhaps, to give thanks to the unions who seek to hold up laborers, to seek to protect laborers. I remember a bumper sticker years ago that said, if you enjoy weekends, give thanks to the unions because they're the ones that gave us the weekend, going all the way back to the 1930s and Francis Perkins and Franklin Roosevelt. So, we passed the bill in New York to give farm workers equality, and now RMM is working with the United Food and Commercial Workers and the Retail Workers and Department Store Union and the AFL-CIO to ensure that workers can actually collectively bargain so that their voice can be heard. And so we ask for your prayers at St. Bart's for RMM and the workers and the unions that we work with so that we can labor on. That is one of our favorite hymns, right? Come labor on. So we're laboring on with your prayers and your support.
What thoughts do you have about the state of unions today? You just helped secure these rights for these farm workers, but what about unions in general? Do Americans appreciate them as much as they should or can?
I think that there are a lot of forces out there that have a lot of access to media and other power vehicles that work hard to paint unions to paint labor in a bad light. And I think it's unfortunate when the church gets caught up in sharing that spreading of that bad light. Because one of the things I've discovered in working with unions is that their mission is very similar to the mission of the church. Their mission is to protect workers, to ensure that the voices of workers are heard, to ensure that the well-being of workers, to love workers. And and there are unions, like any institution, can go astray. Certainly the church has gone astray in many ways, but the core mission is still there. And I've met so many good union leaders and union organizers that are really concerned about the well-being of our brothers and sisters. And so I guess what I would ask the church to do is to pause and get to know unions. And in fact, invite maybe some union leaders to come to the church and speak and preach. Just like we say we don't know farm workers because they're out of sight, out of mind. I think it can be the same thing with unions also. And the reality is, in our diocese, a lot of our sister congregations, church members, are union members. If we have, even at St. Bart's, if there are members of St. Bart's that are teachers, they're probably a member of a union. If there are members of St. Bart's that are nurses, they're probably members of a union. And so to paint unions with a negative brush means that we're also risking painting our own fellow parishioners with a negative brush.
Over the course of the pandemic, we saw sort of unprecedented social benefits being offered, including higher than normal unemployment benefits. You mentioned the stimulus, et cetera. And one thing some employers have been saying recently is, the benefits were too generous from the government. That's why people don't want to come back to work. And there's been a lot of pushback to that, saying it's because the working conditions are not good enough. I know, these kinds of jobs are not necessarily the folks that you're interacting with on a daily basis, but I wonder if you have any reflections on that debate about whether the government was too generous or not.
I want to begin, I'll answer your question, but I want to begin with a reminder. And it goes back to what I said at the beginning of our talk. We are people of faith, and our faith is rooted in the gospel and the two great commandments, to love God and to love our neighbor. That is our starting point. And I'm often struck when I go to congregations and people want to engage in a political conversation about immigration, or they want to engage in a political conversation about whatever issue, or in this case, what we're hearing about workers. Our starting point as people of faith is our love for our neighbor, not the politics. And that's hard to remember at times, right? I mean, because we have to work hard at that, because our daily life is caught up in the New York Times and the Washington Post and what have you, the TV news stations. And so we get really drenched in the political, and then our starting point is the political. So I just wanted to hold that up as a reminder. I do think that our brothers and sisters are no different than any of us. We want to work in a safe place. We want to be treated with dignity. We want to earn at least a living wage. We really would like to earn enough money to be able to live life fully, to be able to send our kids to college, to be able to retire safely. I think we all have that sense. And I think what we're seeing in our society right now is people pausing and having that own conversation with themselves. Is this job good for me? Am I going to be treated with dignity? Do I stand a chance of earning a decent wage? Can I find a way to work where I don't have to do 3 jobs and not see my children? I remember a farm worker father getting up and speaking a couple of years ago, and he said, I work in the apple orchards. At the height of the season, I'm working from sunrise till well after dark. I didn't get to see my son's piano recital at school this year. I didn't get to go to Parents' Day. These are, the realities that we all want to have. And I would hesitate to judge our brothers and sisters who are raising those kind of questions about quality of life and opportunity of life as they're looking about what job to take or what job to consider or whether to return to something that they felt really wasn't working for them. I think those are far deeper questions that people are asking themselves than just the simple question of, is this $300 or $600 that I'm getting in a benefit the major deciding point about my life? I think we trivialize our brothers and sisters when we say that they're just sitting around because they're getting an extra $300. I haven't run into any of the workers that we work with that are having that kind of conversation or that kind of decision.
We're coming close to the end of our time. We talked about unions. I wonder if you can talk about corporations and their effects on workers and ways in which we as a society can think differently about corporations and the restrictions we put on them.
Well, let me throw another curveball. A few years ago, the Supreme Court ruled that corporations could be considered people, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, then again, as people of faith, because many of our parishioners are leaders within corporations, how do we get our corporation to love our neighbor? How do we get our corporation to be a good neighbor? How do we view our corporation then as a member of the community, of God's community? And I was in a church years ago outside of Boston, and the name of the church was Epiphany. And we used to have a monthly gathering called Epiphany at Work. And we'd meet in downtown Boston and we'd gather for lunch, and folks would talk about the issues of their work life. And one was the managing partner in Boston's largest law firm, and one was a professor at MIT, and one worked for one of the big hotel companies. And they were CEOs and they were secretaries, and they'd gather together and we'd talk about, how do you be faithful in the midst of my corporate life? I think that's the opportunity for corporations. Corporations are key figures, key organizations within our life today, and they offer so much, and there's so much opportunity. But like with anything, whether it's the church, it's a union, it's a corporation, again, as people of faith, how are we intentional in living our life in faith?
We're coming close to the end of our time. I wonder if you have any final thoughts you want to share with us, Richard.
I really applaud you, Peter, and I applaud St. Barts and the good people of St. Barts. You have been a creative and loving congregation for so many years. I've been in this diocese a long time, so I've witnessed St. Bart's for a long time. You have a remarkable reputation, and I just really applaud this forum and your intentionality for being thoughtful about labor, our labor, others' labor, and how we can labor in the vineyard uh, in the name of God and as beacons of God's love. So thank you, St. Bart's.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. As I mentioned, we are going to put information about the October 9th and 10th weekend in the chat, so you can find out more about that. And also, if you're interested in being part of a delegation, please email me and let me know, pthompson@stbarts.org. Thank you all for watching. Next week, in commemoration of the 20th anniversary of September 11th and in recognition of the number of people we've lost due to COVID-19, Dorothy Hollinger, who is a psychotherapist from Harvard Medical School, is going to be with us to talk about grief next week. So I hope you'll join us for that. And I hope you'll join us for worship in just a few minutes at 11 a.m. Thank you so much for joining.